Crossover fighters have always been something fun for me. While I am nowhere near a good player at fighting games, seeing different franchises come together is always something magical. Right off the top of your head, when it comes to crossover fighters, you might think of Super Smash Bros. Or Marvel vs. Capcom. But there's another that actually started on handhelds. Not Marvel vs. Capcom, but SNK vs. Capcom. Developed by the SNK company over 20 years ago and its first release since the Neo Geo Pocket Color original, here is my review of SNK vs. Capcom, the match of the Millennium for the Nintendo Switch. As with most fighters from the 90s, there isn't a whole lot of story here. The basic premise is that we're in a world where different fighters from different games are all together. Geese from the Fatal Fury series and M. Bison from Street Fighter have formed an alliance and are planning something big and diabolical. And that's pretty much it. The story is pretty light, but it does give a bit of fan service depending on the character you choose to play as. For example, Chun-Li has a pretty decent amount of dialogue in line with her character, whereas some of the other characters like Ryu, ironically, feel very detached from the story. When it comes to gameplay, SNK vs. Capcom is a 2D fighting game with mini-games thrown into the mix. Now this port of the game has enhancements the original did not have. Like other Neo Geo Pocket Switch releases, we see an entire hardware system on screen with what is happening in-game. Now whether you like this or not is really dependent on the person. I hate seeing this on screen and always have to zoom in and switch skins up until it is gone. Though it is a neat little thing they threw in, especially in handheld mode. You can use the touchscreens to tap the quote-unquote buttons of that Neo Geo Pocket on screen, and it will actually do what those buttons would do on an actual system. Other visual enhancements include switching the design or removing that Neo Geo Pocket from the screen altogether, and swapping between clear and CRT filters. We also have a rewind feature, something a bit strange to see in a fighter. You can use this literally at any time to rewind a little bit. You can even do it at the final boss of tournament mode so you don't lose and go back to the last segment where you had a good amount of health. But my favorite enhancement and feature, if you can even call it that, is the save system. The game remembers exactly where you were when you close the game down, so when you restart your Switch and we're in the middle of tournament mode, when you reboot the game, you will literally resume as if you made a save state and loaded that save state. Now let's dive into the game itself. As far as the cast goes, this crossover has over 20 playable characters across King of Fighters, Fatal Fury, Street Fighter, Darkstalkers, and many more that can be unlocked as you play. Then we get to the game modes. You've got 4 basic things you can go through: Tourney, Versus Mode, Olympic, and Sparring. Tournament mode serves as the game's arcade or story mode. You choose a character and go through a gauntlet of battles, getting story bits here and there until you meet the 2 villains for the final fight. This mode is also how you unlock new characters. Each time you clear tournament mode, you see a little grid with some tiles that disappear from a portrait. When all of those tiles are gone, you get a new character for the roster. Then we have Versus Mode, which is pretty standard, but it does allow you to do split-screen multiplayer if you've got a friend nearby. Finally, we've got Sparring, which is basically a practice mode where you can learn character movesets, and Olympic, which is probably the most unique of all game modes. You can go into it with either Team SNK or Team Capcom, and you've got special little mini-games that you can play based on those franchises. These are cute little distractions like having Arthur from Ghosts and Goblins jump over gaps and collect treasure. But we've talked enough about the roster and game modes, let's talk about the actual fighting mechanics. SNK vs. Capcom lets you choose from 3 different fighting styles that are based on the franchises shown in the game. Each character has a lot of movesets that require specific button inputs, and many of these are done in the same way they are in the original games. Any Street Fighter veteran can come in and throw off Hadokens with Ryu without once looking up a move list. Outside of the styles, we've got a bunch of standard mechanics with jumping, directional blocking, and gauge buildups. While combos aren't terribly elaborate, as you've only really gotten punch and kick buttons with some combination of inputs that can do a few different things, it is overall a solid fighting system despite being from 1999. And that brings us to content and length. This is a pretty small game, but with the Olympics mode we have a decent amount of stuff to do. One run through tourney mode can take as little as 20 or 30 minutes, though the minigames in Olympics mode and all of the unlockable characters and moves makes this not too bad of a deal at only $8. Before moving on though, let's talk about controls, and you know a control issue is never a good thing for a fighter. Overall, it didn't take me long to learn how to use the moves here, especially for characters I was already familiar with, but there is a bit of input lag when you try to pull off some of the more elaborate combos. The rewind button being here does help that with the difficulty, but it is certainly noticeable and aggravating when you do the button inputs you think was right for a Hadouken and you just throw a regular punch. Thankfully, that was the only control issue, so let's move on to presentation. This game uses kind of chibi-fied versions of the characters involved, both for the fighting sprites and the colorful cutscene versions. The sprites don't look bad on the Switch overall, it's just a bit of a different design. Now when it comes to performance, I have no complaints. I never had any frame drops, load times are pretty much non-existent, and it never crashed on me. So with that in mind, let's move on to battery life. On the original model, SNK vs Capcom has a battery range of 3 hours and 19 minutes up to 5 hours and 25 minutes. On the Nintendo Switch Lite, it has a range of 3 hours and 26 minutes up to 5 hours and 40 minutes. And on the Redboxer V2 2019 model, it has a range of 8 hours to 11 hours and 6 minutes. In conclusion, SNK vs Capcom has released for the first time in 22 years and remains a cute and fun little fighter. Now on the downside, the game's input lag will definitely turn off some of the more hardcore fighter fans. But if you can deal with a little input lag, it's a nice little mashup of Street Fighter, Fatal Fury, and more from the past. Reviews to go rates SNK vs Capcom the match of the Millennium for the Nintendo Switch an 8.5 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching and have a great day.